and we'll get those packed up and transported to Nashville on the way to polishing the pulpit. Bread of Life is collecting for school kits. A list of items needed are listed in the bulletin and in the daily updates. The deadline for donating towards that is August 30th. Helping our youth. There are sign-up sheets on the youth bulletin board. If you'd like to host one of the Sunday evening devotionals or prepare a meal for one of the teens in the Word, you can sign up for fall and winter months. There's a bunch of opportunity there. Wednesday evening, adult class teachers. So basically on Wednesday evenings, we've had a summer series where we've had guest speakers come in. So we're having the opportunity this fall, if any man that's baptized wants to teach a week, if you don't feel like signing up for a whole quarter, but you're willing to come up and teach a Wednesday night class, that the topic is already there. It's like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and each week there's a sign-up sheet. You can sign up, and the topic for the week, the block of scriptures that for that week is listed out. So I know we got a bunch of young men. We got a bunch of not quite as young men that haven't been teaching class, and if you want to take a shot at a week, we would encourage that. So sign up for that, bulletin board. We'd love for you to volunteer. Our class this morning is going to be taught by Glen Tattersal. He's going to report out on his work, New Zealand, Tasmania. We're glad that he's here. He's been here a week or so, but he's traveling around a little bit here in the States, and we're glad he's here today. We're looking forward to his lesson, and I will turn it over to Glen.
Let me see if I've got everything turned on, and we do. It is good to be able to visit with you here at Central. It's been 5 years since my last visit, and of course we had a little problem with the virus between those 5 years, so it's good for me to be able to be here and to give you a bit of an update about what's been happening in Australia. Now, my picture just disappeared, so I'm looking for the technical support to bail me out a bit here. I don't know if I pressed the wrong button or what. There we go, like magic. One of the things about PowerPoint is that when it works, it can make you really look good. And when it doesn't work, it leaves you up the front looking like a complete turkey, and you're trying to get things working. Okay, as I go through this report about the Lord's work in Australia, and I'm particularly going to be focusing in on the work being done in Tasmania, and more specifically, the work of the Northern Midlands Church, for which I'm a preacher. I want to give you an overview. Maybe you've heard sermons, maybe you've heard lessons, and as you go through it, you think, where in the world are we? And you've lost track of, the flow of things. Well, I want to give you a bit of an overview at the beginning, just so you know where we are going to be progressing. I want to talk about Australia as a country. Now, how many people here have been to Australia? Okay, we've had a few. How many have watched Crocodile Dundee? Okay. Australia is not necessarily like Crocodile Dundee. But I want to talk about Australia as a country, what kind of place that it is, and then to specifically talk about the Lord's Church in Australia. And I think you might find some of the statistics that I give to you somewhat surprising. To then go on and look at the challenges that we face. Now, some of these challenges, and I've been very interested in talking with brethren as I've been travelling around here in the States at some of the challenges that you face. Some challenges will be ones that you can relate to, others are going to be much more unique to us. To then bring the focus down to the state of Tasmania and look at the church there, before going on and specifically look at the work of the Northern Midlands Church of Christ, for which I'm a preacher, and then to begin to round out the report by considering our plans for the future. Now, Australia as a country is nearly as big as the United States. If you were to take off the state of Alaska, in terms of the land area, we're of a similar size with about 3 million square miles. It is the world's sixth largest country in terms of land area, and it is somewhat unique in the countries of the world in that it does not share a border with any other country, being basically a giant island. But Australia tends to be a fairly dry country. A lot of the middle part of Australia is very sparsely vegetated, and indeed there are significant desert areas. That means that most of the population are scattered down the eastern seaboard and some in the southwestern corner, which gets the most rainfall, and believe it's one of the most urbanised countries in the world. Because Australia is not really suitable for large-scale agriculture, our population is not as big as what you have here in the States, which I believe is about 330 odd million people. We have a population of a little over 25 million, but its cultural values and standards are typically Western. So if you were thinking, I'd like to go somewhere overseas, but I don't want it to be too much of a culture shock where you can sort of feel, reasonably at home, shall we say, then coming to Australia would be a good place to put on your bucket list of places to go and visit. We have a reasonably high standard of living, and from what I've observed, it is somewhat similar to what you have here in the US. Obviously, there are some places like here that have higher standards of living than others. But we also have a high cost of living. The price of a gallon of what we call petrol, you'd call gasoline, is about $7 Australian, which is around about $5.90, I think, if my conversion is right in American dollars. A little over a month ago, flew into Charleston in South Carolina, picked up the rental car, and it's always a joy for me to go to a gas station and fill up because it's so cheap. And I really enjoy that. When you pull up at a gas station in Tasmania and you pay over $100, that hurts. But here it's a lot better. Price of housing has gone up quite a lot, and from what I understand, you've had the same sort of forces here with COVID, but the price of housing has just gone up markedly, and the median price of housing in Australia is about 715,000 Australian dollars, which is around about, again, 590 odd thousand US dollars. The country of Australia used to be called a, inverted commas, Christian nation. But that is a harder description to apply to the country, with only about 44% of the population, according to the latest government census, now identifying as having a Christian belief. Of that 44%, the largest group are the Catholic Church, and they come in at 20%. The next largest group is the Anglican Church, I think you call it the Episcopal Church, the Church of England. They are just under 10%. Then you have another denominational group called the Uniting Church. Now, that's a name given to an Australian denomination, but basically it's a coalition of Methodist, Presbyterian and Congregational churches. They're just under 3%. Rounding out the 44% is everybody else. So you're going to have the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Pentecostal groups, the Baptists and so forth. But also in that almost 11% will be members of the Lord's Church. Of those that claim a Christian belief, not that many take their belief seriously, with only about 1 in 7 so-called Christians attending church services on a weekly basis. Indeed, if only half of that 44% took their belief seriously, then Australia would be going in a different moral direction than what it currently is. There are several trends that are very noteworthy, and we can see these very evident over the last 60 years. Back in 1966, when I was a boy, about 90% of the population identified as having some sort of Christian affiliation. That's shrunk down now to that 44% that I've mentioned. We do have a growing number of people that identify with other faiths, such as Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, and that's because we draw a lot of immigrants from the Southeast Asian area, where these belief systems are more prevalent. The most startling trend, however, is those that claim no religious affiliation. They don't claim to be Christian, they don't claim to be Islamic or whatever. They just don't have any religious affiliation. And that's now risen up to about 39%. So it's pretty evident, based on what we're seeing here, by the time in about 2-3 years' time, when the next government census is taken, those with no religious affiliation will exceed those that claim a Christian belief. It's estimated of the 25 million Australians that 1.5 million don't know anyone that would claim to be a Christian. So you might have a factory, you might have an office situation, and people just don't know anybody that would be a Baptist or a Catholic or any other such supposed Christian affiliation. What people do have more of an interest in is sport. And sport is the topic that you're going to get most people fired up and interested in. And sporting activities outnumber religious activities by about 4 to 1. And for the record, that picture up there is a cricket match that is played, and that's probably Australia's #1 summer sport. Bringing the focus down now from Australia religiously to looking at the Lord's Church in Australia. Statistics have been taken by brethren over a number of years, and those statistics reveal that throughout the entire country there are an estimated 2,000 members of the Lord's Church. They are split amongst 80 congregations. Now those numbers can vary a little bit from year to year, but that's basically where we're at. So just simply doing the maths, the average size of a congregation is 25 members. So the church here at Central would probably be larger than arguably the largest congregation in Australia. There are some large congregations, perhaps getting towards 100 members. There are some that may be 80 or 60, but commonly churches are fairly small. In areas where there's less than 130,000 people, now I'm not sure of the total size here of Paducah and the surrounding area, but certainly I think from what I've heard, this would be the case. Areas less than 130,000 people. Over half of the congregations that are meeting in those areas are less than 10 or fewer members. So more small churches are quite common. You know, sometimes I've visited churches and they've said, well, we're just a small congregation. You know, we're 20 or 30 members. And I sometimes flippantly say, well, that's a mega church in Australian context. There are an estimated 5 elderships in the country. I can only probably count on a hand 4, but I want to be generous because I don't want to overstate the case. About 4 to 5 elderships. Only one of those is one that I would commend, and I'll have more to say about that particular eldership in just a few moments. Working with the Brotherhood on a full-time basis, there is an estimated 10 to 15 men who work with those 80 congregations. Now, it doesn't mean to say they visit around congregations on a sort of a circuit basis, but working with the church is only about 10 to 15 men in the entire country on a full-time basis. Thankfully, that number is increasing. We've just had a couple of young men who have graduated from the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies, the old East Tennessee School of Preaching, and they've just moved back to Australia in the last couple of months. And my son Trevor, who was with me on my last visit to you, he has just started his studies there and he's looking forward to returning to Australia to work with the church in some capacity in a couple of years' time. Given that there are a lack of men working full-time with the church, mutual preaching ministries are very common, where men just simply rotate through the preaching and teaching on a weekly basis. Now that has to be done of necessity, and it's good to be able to train up men to be able to preach and teach. But one of the downsides of this, particularly when it's done on an ongoing basis, is that you have men, they work during the week, they come home, they've got their domestic responsibilities to take care of, and so often the lessons aren't as well thought out, as well researched as what could be done, and so that leads to more of a shallowness in the teaching of some congregations. I was looking up some statistics of Texas. Now, Texas has a similar population to Australia, at least until you had all the refugees coming across, but about 25 million people. And there are an estimated 2,000 congregations in that one state. So there is as many congregations of the Lord's Church in Texas as there are individual Christians in Australia. So what are the challenges that we face? Well, one of them is spiritual indifference. Also, there is materialism and secularism, this idea that nothing that's based on the Bible is to have an impact in the public sphere. As I mentioned, we have a high standard of living, and it's often the case when people have a reasonable standard of living, or the government provides for them generous welfare, that their interest in spiritual things declines proportionally. Spiritual indifference is another challenge that we face. As I mentioned, there's a lot of people that don't have any religious affiliation, and those that do are not particularly that interested in spiritual things. I go out door knocking on a regular basis, and as I seek to engage people in conversation, I'll often ask the question, well, if you were to die tonight, where do you reckon you'd spend eternity? And it's not uncommon to have people say, well, don't know, don't care, and I'll find out when I get there. And so that is a challenge to be able to break through that kind of mindset. There is also a growing negative attitude towards Christianity, or if you wish, Christianity as conceived by the public has been lowered in its social standing. Now, there are several reasons for this. As you may be aware, some of the denominations have had various scandals, and in the mind of the public, that's lowered trust in what they perceive to be Christianity, because they don't make a distinction between what goes on in denominations and Christianity in general. Another area in which there is a growing negative attitude is because, young people, they're brought through the school system and they're told that evolution is a fact of science, and science is based on evidence, whereas religion, that's really based upon superstition and the like. And another area that there is a lowering, if you like, of the opinion of people towards Christianity is because of the successful, for the want of a better expression, marketing of the LGBT movement. And so they have sold people on the idea, well, they were just born that way. And so anybody, like Christians, that would say anything against them, well, that's akin to criticising people because of the colour of their skin. So that's a factor that is playing into this lowering social standing of Christianity in Australia. Another challenge that we face, and this is more unique to us, is the small size of the church in Australia. Although many people live in the major cities, there are many places where there are people who are remote from the church, and so it's difficult to evangelise. And that's going to play into a point that I'm going to bring up in a moment. Another challenge is the lack of sound brethren working with the church. Not all of that 10 to 15 men who I mentioned working full time are just staying with the scriptures. And on this final point, there are cities and there are large towns, population areas, in which there is no church meeting within hundreds of miles. Now, on my travels here, particularly in the south, it's very common. You go from town to town to town, even little small towns, and you'll see up a sign, Church of Christ meets, down the road and so forth. And it would seem that within half an hour you could go and visit with quite a number of different churches. In Australia, that's not possible. There are places where if you wanted to visit with the Church of Christ, you'd have to travel hours. Remember, going back a number of years ago, my late wife and I were travelling from Adelaide, South Australia to Melbourne. And that's about an 8-hour drive. We overnighted it in one large town. And it really struck me that if people wanted to connect up with a Church of Christ, they would have to travel, 3 to 4 hours to be able to do so. Another factor with this is that, to use an example, there was a certain man in Queensland, and he hopped onto the website of the World Video Bible School, became interested, reached out to them. They in turn reached out to a brother in Australia who had a Zoom Bible study with him. Now, this particular man, he wanted to become a Christian, so he was put into contact with brethren. He had to travel some distance to meet with these brethren. He was baptised into Christ. But because of the remoteness of where he was, even though brethren would come down once every couple of weeks, he really wasn't getting the support and the encouragement that he needed. And the last that I've heard, he has fallen away because he was not able to be given the support of faithful brethren to help encourage him. Nonetheless, despite all of that, despite all of that, because we all face challenges wherever we are, we're confident in the power of the gospel and the potential to be able to reach souls. When Jesus said, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature," he was not just talking about going into those areas that were white unto harvest. He was also talking about going into those areas where the ground needed to be tilled, seed needed to be sown, and to be nurtured before there would be spiritual fruit brought forth. In Isaiah 55 and verse 11, God through the prophet said, "So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it." And so we need to believe in the power of the gospel. And as we seek to reach out, to talk to people about the gospel, what they do with it, that's between them and God. But our responsibility is to bring the gospel to as many people as we can and trust that the power is in the gospel, as Paul would say in Romans 1 and verse 16. He would also say in 1 Corinthians 3 verse 6, "I've planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase." And so we trust in the promises of God and of the power of His word. In bringing the focus now down from looking at Australia as a country to Australia religiously, to looking at the Lord's Church in Australia, I want us to begin focusing on the state of Tasmania. Now, Australia as itself, if you were to look on a map, you'll see it's a giant island. Well, there's another island to the south of the mainland called Tasmania. It's not a different country. It is Australia's smallest state. And as Australia's smallest state, by way of comparison, it's about the same size as West Virginia. We have a population of 557,000. Now, if you're wanting to come to Australia, and if you didn't want to do the theme parks, but you wanted to look at scenery, then coming to Tasmania would be well worth putting on your agenda. Because even though it may seem small as you look on a map of the world, it can actually take you a good couple of weeks to be able to go around, and it has some very beautiful scenery. So there's my part for the tourist business for Australia. Now, if you see this little creature up there underneath the map, he's not the cartoon character. That's actually a real Tasmanian devil. He's not this character that spins around. Little creature about the size of somewhat of a small dog, but it's not something you want to take home as a pet. They're a scavenger, and they have a jaw pressure that is about the highest of any creature its size in the world, and they can just get bones, and they just crunch through bones like nobody's business. As I understand it, they got the name Tasmanian Devil because the early explorers would hear these creatures, and they've got this particular growl about them. And the early explorers, they would hear this going on in the darkness and think, well, there are devils out there making that kind of noise. So there's a little bit of trivia for you to impress somebody with. Okay, looking at the church in Tasmania, there are several congregations around the state. There is us at the Northern Midlands, and I'll have more to say about us in just a few moments. And the nearest faithful congregation to us of any size is the Mersey Bluff Church in Devonport. Now, when I say of any size, I think the number of Christians, aside from children, is probably somewhere 15 to 18 in number. With the Mersey Bluff Church in Devonport, as I say, they're about an hour and a quarter's drive from us to the west. There is Ian, pictured there with his wife, Mabel McPherson. Ian is a retired preacher. He's one of the most evangelistic men that I know, very sound man in the faith. And also pictured there is Brett Rutherford with his wife, Joanne Rutherford. If anyone knows of Rod and Brenda Rutherford, who've done missionary work in different places, now live here in the States, Brett is their youngest son. Now, Brett works as the full-time preacher there, and both Ian and Brett are elders of the congregation. As I mentioned earlier, there's one eldership that I would commend as being very sound and very faithful. This would be that eldership. One of the things that the Mersey Bluff Church have initiated, it's begun this year, but after a good deal of planning and preparation beforehand, is that they instituted what they call the Short-Term Australian Mission Program, STAM. And this is to address the lack of sound brethren, sound preachers, working with Australian churches. And it's open to all brethren. who would like to come and work with churches in Australia for periods of 2 weeks up to 2 years. Getting visas for this is something that's quite doable. And so if brethren want to come and work with churches in Tasmania, they have provided their own self-contained accommodation for brethren to live in if they're there for a short term, or they can put brethren in contact with churches on the mainland to help work with them. So if you were thinking about coming over to Australia and you wanted to do something for the Lord, then this could be of interest to you. The website's there on the slide, but if you want to talk to me later on, if you're interested, then I can put you in touch with Brett Rutherford, who will be able to give you more information. For the Northern Midlands Church, there's a picture of yours truly. Look, that looks marginally better than my passport photo, but Photoshop can only do so much. And Greg Shea, he is a man, single man in his 40s, and he came to work with the congregation a few years ago. And while I'm here, he is doing a lot of the preaching and teaching. As I mentioned, churches tend to be scattered. And so we enjoy the times that we can come together. On our church calendar, there is an intercongregational workshop that we have in March of each year, and brethren from around the state come together for a time of singing, Bible activities, and of course, food, and just simply being able to visit with one another. One of the benefits of a small brotherhood is that you're able to get to know one another from different congregations very well indeed. And as of next year, the Northern Midlands Church will be taking over the organising that on a full-time basis. Perhaps the highlight of our church calendar, though, is our annual intercongregational church camp. It's called Camp Warana, Warana being an Aboriginal word for blue sky. And not only do we have brethren from around the state that attend this camp, but also a number of brethren from interstate congregations will also make the effort to come. Now, we have it in early January, and I know some people might find that surprising, but you just need to understand, down the southern hemisphere, everything is flipped around. When I walked onto the plane a little over a month ago, across the tarmac up onto the plane, it was about 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was looking forward to getting inside where it was warm. And when I got off in Dallas, it had stopped being 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and I had to get myself around the idea it's hot this time of the year. So January is in the middle of our summer period. We've had that camp for 50 years, been a great encouragement and strength to the churches, and a number of people have been converted to Christ as a result of the teaching and encouragement that they have received in that environment. Since I was last over here in 2018, around about June, July of that year, one of the most notable things that's happened with the congregation is that we have actually physically moved our location from the city of Launceston, where we were known as the Balfour Street Church of Christ, to the town of Longford, and now known as the Northern Midlands Church of Christ. Northern Midlands being the name of the municipality, or what you'd probably more identify as being the county. So we've adopted that name to reflect the area in which we're seeking to outreach to. We relocated in late 2018, having been in our previous location for about 35 years. During that 35 years, the congregation had waxed and waned in its numbers, going from a good number and also going down to just a bare handful. During those 35 years, we had continued to be evangelistic. Gospel meetings, gospel outreaches, advertising in various media, and so forth. But we had to face the fact that even though we were doing all of these things, doing them to the best of our ability, we just didn't seem to be making a breakthrough in the community as we wanted. The church building where we were at Balfour Street was also located on the outskirts of the city centre. And it was in a part of the city that it was very hard to have people understand where we actually met. There were a few larger denominational church buildings around, and they'd often be thinking of those buildings rather than where we were. The building where the church met in was a converted house, built back in the 1920s, I believe. And while it was suitable for our purposes, in the area we're in, we weren't able to have large-scale signage, so that also was somewhat of a disadvantage. In late 2018, and this is one of the things that I was talking about that was coming up when I was here last time, we were holding a gospel meeting in the town of Longford. When I say the town of Longford, it's not just that town. And Longford is the, if you like, the centre of that particular county. There was also the towns of Perth and Evandale and Cressy. And so the area that we're outreaching to was about 10,000 souls. And we weren't that far from the city of Launceston either. We had hoped to get interest from people in that area to come and visit with us where we were at Balfour Street. By driving distance, it really wasn't that far, but we came to realise that if we wanted to reach out to that area, we really needed to relocate where the people were. And so after much prayer and consultation, we made the bold decision, stepped out in faith to move in late 2018. For over 12 months, we met in rented halls before we were blessed by having a permanent location. We were providentially helped by the Lord to find a building that was on the very main street of the town. So it wasn't tucked away, in some back street. It was right there where everyone could see the location. Now, the building had been, in its previous use, a fishing tackle shop. And there was a residence that was attached to the back of this shop. So we turned it in from being a fishing tackle shop to a place where we were fishing for men. The area, as I said, was on the front main street. And so just when we started to become very serious in looking for a building in about February of 2019, it came onto the market. Now, without being too tedious, I just want to give you a bit of an insight as to what kind of renovation work was done. You see those yellow dots there? Well, they give you a sense of perspective. You're looking at exactly the same spot. And so up in the top, you've got the shop area as it used to be, then it being gutted, walls taken out, and to how it came to look. In this next slide, we can have another shot looking across from another direction and showing the area. And when we did the renovation work, of course, we had to meet the current building codes, so the wheelchair ramps and so forth. Sometimes people have wondered, who got the lazy boy chair there? We weren't squabbling as to who would get it. But we had a sister who continued to meet with us until she was about 98, 99, and so she got the comfy chair. But finally, we just had to have services in her nursing home, and she passed away last year. So we've put that comfy chair in one of the classrooms. So there's no squabbling about that. This one here shows a picture of the main bedroom area and it being converted into our restroom area. And this final slide shows the old real estate done up kitchen area and it being renovated to become our new kitchen cum fellowship area. And it's very hard, just in looking at some pictures, to just show the transformation that took place. But what I can say is that God's providence was very evident in what was able to be done. In moving down now to really narrow the focus to the work and activities of the Northern Midlands Church, we have on an ongoing basis a workshop, which is essentially a one-day lectureship where we invite brethren from around the state to attend. 2018 is the last time that we met. This was after my last visit in our previous location. 2019 was in one of the rented halls that we had. And of course, you don't get any prizes for guessing why we didn't have one in 2020. That caused quite a bit of disruption to activities with the virus. 2021, 2022, we again resumed in our new location. We have an ongoing program of door knocking and letterboxing. And talking about letterboxing, sometimes I'll write in my report, we were letterboxing in this area, letterboxing in that area, and sometimes people have written back and said, what do you mean by letterboxing? Well, unlike in the States, we can actually put material into people's letterboxes. The post doesn't pick up any material from boxes. If you're going to post a letter, you've got to go to a receptacle somewhere that's scattered around. So as long as someone doesn't have a sign up saying no junk mail or no unaddressed mail, we are free to put flyers into people's boxes. So what we do is we design our own flyers, we get them professionally printed, And then we go round the area that we are outreaching to on a circuit basis. And we work our way through with one flyer, and then we have another flyer on a different theme, and we go through the same area again. And what we're trying to do is to generate interest that people may have in connecting up with the church. And as I'll make the point again a bit later, advertising is all about having your name out there, that when people's attention does turn towards spiritual matters, then hopefully they'll think of connecting up with us. Door knocking is something else that we do on a regular basis. We use the same material that we do for letterboxing, but we also have some locally written and printed tracts that we engage people in to try and gain interest with people. And door knocking is a very interesting form of outreach because, as the expression goes, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you'll get. Well, you don't know what you'll get as you go from door to door. Sometimes you'll get people that are politely interested. Sometimes you'll get people that are a little bit more firm in their not being interested. And sometimes you can have the most interesting discussion with the most unlikely of people. And so the door knocking has proved to be useful to get an idea where people are at, what they're thinking about. Newspaper advertising, again, is something that we do. We have a county newspaper, comes out twice a month. We advertise once a month. So again, we design our own advertisements and we have them printed, and so they're available for anyone that's reading for at least 2 weeks of the monthly cycle. Gospel outreaches are something that we are very keen about. And with gospel outreaches, we are really serious in not just getting brethren from other congregations to visit. We want people from the community to come along. And so we will advertise very widely through our letterboxing program. We will advertise through having roadside signs set up on all the roads that are in the area. We want people from the community to come. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are told that, evolution is a fact of science. And so a couple of years ago, we had one on why I believe in the God of the Bible, looking at the fact that evolution is not a fact of science, but actually Christianity is based upon that which is reasonable, evidence-based, and is consistent with scientific fact. Last year we had one on Let the Bible Speak About, and we talked about the subjects of racism, feminism, environmentalism, and so forth. Again, designed to connect with what people are thinking about. If you have a look, it says on that particular one, it says public seminar. And the reason why we chose that was because we'd go out to people and say, well, look, we've got a gospel meeting coming up, would you like to attend, and so forth. And they'd say, a gospel what? They didn't have a clue what we were talking about. So we just said public seminar to try and connect with people. A Ladies' Day is something that we have commenced this year, back in May. This is the first time any congregation had hosted an intercongregational Ladies' Day. And so sisters from around the state came to that particular day, lessons taught by the ladies, and the men, their job was the catering and the cleaning up. And so a reversal of often what goes on. But the ladies just had a wonderful time, and so we're looking forward to having that, Lord willing, as part of our annual church calendar that Northern Midlands will host. Aside from the local work, I'm also involved in helping out with other works. Pre-COVID, 2019, I was speaking at a lectureship in Singapore, and Lord willing, I'll be back there again later this year. Did a family camp and a gospel meeting in Perth, Western Australia. Last year, there was a family seminar I spoke at in Devonport and a gospel meeting in Toowoomba, Queensland. And earlier this year, I was speaking at a lectureship hosted by a congregation in Sydney, New South Wales. An area that I'm particularly privileged to be involved in is to teach at the Four Seas Bible College in Singapore. Now, besides full-time staff that they actually have in Singapore, they do utilise a number of brethren, including several here from the States, to teach via Skype, or more lately via Zoom, to the students. Brother Peter Chen, a Memphis graduate, is the director of that school, does a great job, and I've been teaching on an annual basis since 2013, primarily on the subject of the Topical Bible series course, but I've also done Genesis, the Evangelist letters, and also the letters to the Thessalonians. The school trains students from Singapore, Malaysia, China, Vietnam, Philippines, India, Laos, I forgot to put Indonesia, but also Timor, Australia, and the United States. And as you look at some of these countries, they represent some of the most populous countries in the world. And so being part of that program, helping these primarily younger brethren go back to their home countries to strengthen the churches they come from, to help establish other churches, is indeed a privilege. Like a lot of congregations, we have a website in which we advertise correspondence courses, online tracks. We have special events that are advertised, audio and video. Now, a lot of the video is embedded from Gospel Broadcasting Network and World Video Bible School. But if you want to hear some local accents, then hop onto our audio section and you'll hear lessons from gospel meetings and also from our workshops. And looking at our plans for 2023 to 2024 as we begin to round out this report, we want to continue with our door knocking, letterboxing and newspaper advertising. As I mentioned earlier, advertising is about continually having your name out there in the minds of the public to hopefully catch those people whose circumstances in life may change and their minds turn towards spiritual things. And before I go on with the next point, let me just add, since we've moved location, we have had much more evangelistic activity, if you wish, than what we had in our previous location. We tend to get more people who will come and visit with us than what we had in our previous location. We've had Bible studies set up, and indeed, earlier this year, we had a man baptized into Christ, and this is all tied in with changing location and being with the people that we're seeking to outreach with. Okay, gospel meeting, early 2024. We had hoped to put one in later this year, but as you can see on the slide, we've got one of our workshops in November, and another congregation is hosting something else in that time period, and we just don't want to overlap too much with them. We are also wanting to have another, well, on this particular point, a community expo exhibit. Now, this will be the first time that we will have been part of this expo. This is being organised by the local council, and various community groups are invited to have a stand and to have a short talk to people about what they do. And so we're looking forward to having that, and it's going to be just a couple of days after I arrive back into Tasmania. Latest day for May 2024, and to use the Australian Postal Service to help with particularly those time-sensitive flyers that we want to put out, like, for example, gospel meetings. The reason why we don't use the Postal Service all the time to distribute our flyers is it's very expensive. Besides the printing costs, it costs over $1,000 a pop for the Postal Service to distribute it. So we tend to go more on our circuit basis using members to distribute material. We're thankful to God for what He's enabled us to do. As I've been mentioning, the providence of God has been very manifest in the work we've done, but recognising that the blessings of God are an opportunity for us to get stuck in even more to do the Lord's work. There are various ways in which you can help us. Number one, please pray for us. You know, we can make all kinds of plans, we can spend money, we can do all kinds of activity, but unless we have the Lord working with us, it can all very easily be in vain. We appreciate keeping in touch, and I've appreciated receiving cards that have been sent to me by my sponsoring congregation from the church here. So thank you very much for everybody that signs their name on those cards. On your ongoing monthly support, and the church here at Central has been very generous with that, and that is really appreciated to be able to focus on doing the Lord's work without distraction. One-off support is also very welcome. I do turn out and I post to supporting congregations a paper copy of my report, which comes out around about once every 2 months. But if you would like to receive it faster and easier than if you want to be on my report list, just write to me at that address or come and have a chat to me later on. And if after a couple of months you don't get one, send me an email and say, hey, you forgot to put me on your list, and we'll fix that. My sponsoring church is the South Avon Church in Mississippi. They have faithful and strong elders, and they are also the overseers of the Gospel Broadcasting Network. And since the early 2000s, they have had an association with helping out with Australian works. So as I bring this report to a close, I want to thank you very much for your interest in learning about the work in Australia. I think it's always very good for brethren to, as much as possible, read the reports that brethren send from different parts of the world, whether it's listening to a report like I've just presented to you, or whether you're watching or reading a report from somebody working in Africa or Asia. It gives us a greater sense of the great brotherhood that we're a part of, to get us familiar with the challenges and the work that's being done by brethren throughout the world. But in particular, as I bring this report to a close, I want to thank you very much for the interest and the help that the church here at Central has given to us. I'll end now, but if you have some questions that you want to ask me a bit later on, please feel free to do so. Thank you.